Tribal Prisoner Program under the Tribal Law and Order Act. His team advised decision makers at BOP and the U.S. Department of Justice on correctional policy, legislation, and regulatory matters. Mr. Rodriguez spent the bulk of his agency career working on on-site federal detention centers, serving as liaison to the courts, defense bar, and U.S. Attorney's Office. He presently serves as the Asian Pacific Islander and Native American Special Emphasis Program Manager at Bureau of Prisons Central Office. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Tim. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Chia. Appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Before I get started, I just want to say that I assume many of you here are in your tribe's criminal justice system in one capacity or another, but I'm sure that many of you are specifically in law enforcement, and those of you in law enforcement know that we are largely in a thankless job. And I say that because this program is probably the most rewarding thing that I've worked on in my bureau career, because it's one of the few times and instances where entities, people, organizations are thankful, interested in the services that we provide. We're usually providing services against someone's will, but this is a little bit different, and I'm very thankful that you're all here today to hear a bit about it. So let me just share my screen and we'll get started. All right. So today I'm going to tell you first about the legal authority for this program, where it comes from, what the eligibility criteria are for a participant to join the program, how BOP makes its designation decisions. That is, how do we classify someone? How do we choose the right facility? Then about the BOP itself, what our system is like generally, what the tribe and the family, the community can expect when someone comes into our custody, things like visitation. And then finally, some limits and logistical issues. And that final part is really going to be the current state of play of the program in terms of its capacity, where we're at right now, problems or issues that have come up that we've learned to address, et cetera. So what is the program? The Tribal Prisoner Program, and that's what it's called in statute. It's authorized under the Tribal Law and Order Act as it was amended by the 2022 Reauthorization of the Violence Against Women's Act. And it's specifically for tribal inmates with long-term sentences. So individuals that have been sentenced in, I don't know if there's a standard term for this, but enhanced sentencing courts or TLOA compliant tribal courts. It's specifically for individuals who have a sentence of at least 1 year that have been sentenced in one of those courts. There are no costs involved. There are costs involved with transportation, which I'll get to later, but for the incarceration itself, there are no costs for medical, for programs, anything like that. I put in that term resort fees because there's nothing more annoying than going to a hotel and then finding that you're getting charged $40 for Wi-Fi and parking, but there's nothing like that. It truly is a no-cost program. And then finally, BOP is indifferent to the status of the individual in terms of whether they are a member of the tribe, whether they are part of a recognized tribe in general, or whether or not they're even Indian. This is about the plain language of the statute, which for us doesn't have anything to do with McGirt or Castro Berta or any of that. So if somebody complies with all of the requirements, we're going to have them come into our custody. So here are those eligibility criteria. The subject has to have been convicted of a violent crime comparable to one of the crimes specified in the Major Crimes Act. The key word there is comparable. BOP is not looking for reasons to turn anyone away. So if the if the offense itself, what it's called, doesn't appear to be compliant or equivalent to something in the Major Crimes Act. We're going to look at the elements of the crime. We're then perhaps going to look at the underlying conduct. We might even look at the complaint and the affidavit or declaration of any of the officers involved, et cetera, all of the underlying conduct if we're not sure that something is compliant. Now, if it's compliant on its face, just from the name of the crime, we're not going to get into any of that. I think I might have some questions. I see my chat popping up here. No, not yet. All right. So the second eligibility marker is that the subject has to have at least 1 year left to serve at the time of referral to the BOP. So you're unable to refer someone before they are sentenced. BOP is not going to give you a prospective decision about, well, what if we submit this packet? Is this person going to be approved? That's not how it's going to work. So unfortunately, you will need to wait until the person is sentenced and then send the application. I say unfortunately because many of the questions that I've received over the last few years have been about whether or not the court can plan knowing that the BOP is an option at the time of sentencing. And unfortunately, that's not going to be a guarantee because we will have to look at the application and all of the elements to make sure that we believe that the subject is compliant once we see the sentencing order and what they were convicted of. They need to be an adult, so no juveniles. Someone has to be 18 at the time of the offense, and we're going to test them for TB when they come into custody. The application process, you'll find it online, and I'll have that website for you at the end of the slideshow, but you submit the referral form, the application form, which is on the website. BOP is going to do a review of the packet. We're going to designate the applicant to the right facility based on their needs and security parameters. And we've gotten that review down to about 1 month. So it doesn't take an unreasonable amount of time. Now, here's the kicker. At the time that Chia and I were talking about this, this presentation, we were nearing our capacity of 100 persons. We've actually reached that capacity. So the program's been in operation for about 2.5 years, and we are at capacity of 100 people. Don't let that discourage you, because all that means is that we are full, but we have people being released on a rolling basis. Almost everyone that we have in custody has a sentence of 1, 2, or 3 years or something in that range. So we literally have people coming out every single month. So the waiting list, I don't even think it's 2 or 3 people at this point. So even though we have a 1 month turnaround, I really don't anticipate you're going to be on that waiting list for more than an additional month or 2 at this point. So it is something to keep in mind, but it's not something to be afraid of or to be discouraged by. When you hear back from BOP that you've been put on a waiting list, it doesn't mean that you're not going to hear back within a reasonable amount of time. What does the application form ask for? Well, it asks for things that you might expect. Personal data, biographical information, social data about the family, and then all the sentencing information. As I said, we're going to want the actual language from the code itself, the criminal code, and what the offense was. We're going to want to know about any pending warrants, detainers, prior sentencing record, and then, of course, the sentencing order for this current sentence that the BOP is implementing. And we also want to see not just how much time was imposed, but we want to know from the court if there were any recommendations from the judge about what the sentence should entail, about what kinds of possible programs or what kinds of priorities the tribe might have in terms of location and placement. If the court makes very clear that above all, the most important thing is physical proximity to the tribe to facilitate in-person visits, then as long as we don't have medical or security parameters for making a decision to the contrary, we will pick some place that's very close. And we'll place less emphasis on programs and things like that. If the court says that programming is most important, that will be one of the main criteria. So I'll get into some of those possible scenarios a bit later so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. We're going to want to know about victim notification, any gang affiliations, medical and mental health summary, and that's very important. Medical is probably the most important criteria in terms of something that can change placement in terms of geographical location or can override the need for programs. First and foremost, we need to make sure that the applicant is being taken care of physically, and that is going to be probably the top criteria. And if they're currently in custody, we're going to want to know about any programs that they're participating in and whether they have been behaving themselves, whether there's been any disciplinary issues. So I put 500 driving miles from home because for typical federal defendants that are routine, typical BOP prisoners, a piece of legislation called the First Step Act dictates that we should be placing folks within 500 driving miles of their home, pending other important factors such as medical needs and security level. And although the tribal participants are not typical federal inmates and the First Step Act will not apply, we're still going to try to hit that target of 500 miles of home so that they are relatively close, they can have visits, and it might be much closer than 500 miles depending on the location. But just because we don't have a ton of facilities in some parts of Indian country, a flight or a long drive might be involved. But these are some of the factors that we look at. And as I said, judicial recommendations are important, and it's something that we take into consideration very seriously. When it comes to medical care, we have a 4-tier classification system. And care level 1 and 2, any BOP facility in the country, over 120 facilities can handle up to care level 2. And care level 2 might include some pretty serious conditions that you might think are not, that would require placement at a more complex facility. But even something like stable HIV/AIDS is something that we can handle at a care level 2. Chronic mental health disorders, things of that nature. When we get to care level 3, we're talking about something like dialysis or certain forms of cancer treatment. And then when we get to care level 4, we're talking about someone that needs to be in a actual hospital setting at all times, a nursing home type setting, or someone undergoing extremely serious chemo that leaves them almost bedridden. I will say when we're talking about care level 4 in particular, those are limited beds. We have 7 medical centers in BOP, but it takes time. Unless someone is acutely ill, it takes time for someone to get approved for one of those spaces. And I think this is the one area where BOP might say that we're not a good fit because of the time involved that it takes to free up one of those medical beds. If someone is at a care level 3 or 4 in particular, we might ask that the tribe reconsider, especially given the complexities involved with transportation to whatever facility we might select. Since BOP is not going to be covering that, you've got to keep that in mind as well. BOP has a lot of tribal members in custody that are not part of this program, and we're not unfamiliar with accommodating spiritual and cultural practices at our institutions. We do have at many locations sweat lodges. Our chaplains who facilitate faith practices in all kinds of religions and faith groups are accustomed to doing things like smudging ceremonies. Our employees are trained on how to properly handle sacred items. When it comes to search, if they need to search a medicine bag, they're not just going to open it and look inside. They are trained to contact a chaplain to handle all of these items with respect. And that is something that we are reminded of at annual training every year. There are plenty of specialized programs. Substance abuse treatment is something that's offered at all BOP facilities. We have almost 700 doctoral level psychologists, and then another 650 drug abuse specialists in our system of 122 prisons. So every location will have trained psychologists and drug abuse treatment specialists. I put that GED classes are incentivized because they're practically mandatory. If you choose not to take them, you won't get the most basic privileges like commissary or visitation. So if someone comes into custody that does not have a high school diploma or equivalent, they're going to get placed in that class, and they're going to be strongly incentivized to take those classes. But there are other opportunities available for folks who are GED or high school compliant, and I'll give you some examples of those in a second. I know this is a lot of text, so don't worry about getting all the details. What I want to show you here is these are some snippets from our First Step Act programs guide. So if you want to find out what the BOP offers in terms of programs, just go online and search for BOP First Step Act programs guide, and you're going to get a PDF document that describes about 50 or 60 different programs throughout the BOP. And for each program, it'll give you information like this. So this one, for example, is for one of our sex offender treatment programs. It talks about what the program offers, how it works, how long it takes. So you're going to have to be in custody for greater than this amount of time to be part of this program, for example. And then all of the locations. So if the sentencing court believes that the offender would benefit from something like this and has the time in custody that would allow them to participate, that's something that the court can ask for. And the court will also know where the locations are and can keep in mind that some of them may be potentially very far away from the tribe. And that's something that the court would consider when making the sentencing recommendation. Here's another one that is geared toward first-time offenders, the Challenge Program. Lists all the locations. It's anger management and antisocial cognitive behavioral therapy-based program. This one is for post-secondary education. So these are locations where offenders can take college classes, can take classes towards an associate or bachelor's degree. And then the last one that I have here, I'm sorry, this one is the one for first-time offenders, the BRAVE program. And Challenge is for individuals who have a comorbidity of both some kind of mental illness, serious mental illness, as well as a prior history of substance abuse. So it's for individuals with dual diagnosis, which, as we all know, is a lot of people who end up in custody. So these are just examples of what the First Step Act guide can tell you about and help you understand in terms of what BOP is offering. Now, let's say you have someone go through the application process, they're approved, they get to their BOP facility. How does the family stay in touch? Well, you go to the BOP website and there's a section called Stay in Touch that tells you how to do everything from make calls to send email and mail, put money on their books, etc. Each inmate gets 300 to 500 minutes a month. During the holiday winter months, it goes up to 500 minutes a month. Video visits are increasingly common at our facilities. It's not yet at every location, but that is going to be an option increasingly at every facility. Family visitation is encouraged, and in general, we do want offenders to keep in touch with the community, because that is one of the key ways that we prevent recidivism, is by maintaining that contact. In terms of the specific facility that they're going to be at, you can look up that facility on the BOP website. You're going to find information about how to send things, visitation schedules, etc., and a phone number and email address if you need to reach out to them. Now, let me get to some of the program limitations. As I did mention, we do have a statutory cap of 100 people. There is a waiting list, but please don't be discouraged by that. It's quite modest at this point, and I hope it stays that way, but it shouldn't discourage you from applying. Once BOP gets your application, you'll either be notified that it's being processed or that it's been put on a waiting list. And then the waiting list, of course, is in order of receipt. So you'll get another message either when your application is being reviewed or when the review is finished. Maybe at both stages, but for sure you'll be notified. As I said, transportation is not included. You know, there are some options. If the offender is low security enough and the court is comfortable with it, you can have the person self-surrender. I don't know how common that's going to be, but another option is, of course, to have your own tribal law enforcement conduct the move, but that involves cost of transportation, overtime, potentially hotel, all of that. So another option is to request the assistance of the U.S. Marshal Service. BOP wants to be careful to not speak for the marshals and represent that they will be approving all of these requests. But if you go to that website that I've listed there, there is information on how to request a move for an individual that's a part of this program. And it's a district by district decision that individual districts will make in terms of whether they do it at no cost, whether they charge a fee, and it's usually not a very high fee, but it is a case-by-case decision that the U.S. Marshals will make. And if you are a first-time applicant, if you're a tribe that's applying for the first time, but there's been another tribe that has worked with that U.S. Marshals district for purposes of this program, you won't have to reinvent the wheel. They'll obviously have a procedure in place. They'll know exactly what to tell you because they've gotten the question before. This is about prison. It's not jail. And I've had some conversations with disappointed police chiefs that have found out that this is not a BIA jail. You know, this is not a place for placing someone immediately after arrest and then having them there while they're pending trial. It is something that has to happen after the sentence has been imposed. So that is one major limitation and something that folks should be clear on. Again, if the applicant has an extreme medical condition, you're going to want to keep that in mind. BOP might not be able to take them, but we can take some very unwell people that have complex medical conditions. So it won't hurt to ask. It won't hurt to try, but I just want to caution everyone. And finally, BOP doesn't make any real-time sentence adjustments. What do I mean by that? It means that we don't know the sentence computation rules for every tribe that we're working with. And if someone commits misconduct in BOP, and for a federal inmate, we would have taken away, 1 week of good conduct time because they did something serious, we're not going to dock the tribal participant 1 week if they misbehave. If they do something very serious, we might actually ask the tribe to take them back, of course. But what I mean by that is that they also don't get credit. So certain programs that BOP inmates can participate in, such as one for drug abuse treatment that's quite rigorous, they can get up to 1 year off of their sentence if they complete this very intensive program. BOP is not going to give credit for that program because by statute, we don't have the authority to modify the sentence for these tribal inmates. So whether it's in terms of credit or being sanctioned, that's just not something that BOP is going to do. Now, if we get an email or call from the tribal court saying, we'd like you to reduce the sentence that we have on file with you by 1 month, we'll go ahead and do that. So the tribe still has discretion to make whatever adjustments it deems fit, but it's not something that BOP is going to do. And let's move to questions.
Yeah, it looks like we have a couple questions here.
All right, let me chat.
I could read it out, that way folks can.
Okay,
so one is, we have placed 3 offenders into the program. A significant barrier at this point is coordinating our offenders to be picked up for placement. This is a cost significant amount to our prison board budget. Is there any talk of either offering assistance, possibly through grants, or a waiver to reduce cost?
I understand that that's a concern. It's a concern that many tribes have. It's an expense that many tribes are frustrated with when participating in this program. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, it's not BOP's place to say what can be done or what may be done, because that's just not part of our mission. It is something that I can ask my colleagues about at the Office of Tribal Justice and elsewhere, if there are any conversations happening with the U.S. Marshals that might move us toward a more comprehensive approach to all of this in terms of covering transport. But right now, it is still up to the tribe to get the individual to the institution and then back from it.
It looks like there is a, okay, trying to go in order here, sorry. We had, my computer is not behaving. Okay. What happens when the person is transferred to another location, sometimes to another state?
I'm just wondering if that, for the person that asked that question, is that something that happened to one of your members while they were in custody with us as part of the program, where they moved to another facility?
Whoever answered, if you want to take yourself off of mute, that would be great, or you can type it in.
While we're waiting for that input, and please feel free to interrupt me if the person who posed that question does speak up, but in a case of a longer sentence, we might move the individual for any number of reasons. We might find out that one of the programs that we think they're a good candidate for, a spot has opened up that we didn't expect, and we want to move them to a place where that program is being offered. There's all kinds of reasons that we might move people, but for sentences as short as we typically see, unless we have a court that is stacking multiple very serious offenses where we're getting 5, 6, 7 years, we're really talking about commonly like a 2 to 3 year sentence. And for something that's short, BOP will typically designate you to a location and keep you there for the duration of the sentence. So it's uncommon that they're going to move, but it's possible. But I don't really anticipate BOP moving folks around once they've been placed to that initial designated facility.
Thanks, Tim. It looks like they did follow up. They said, I know sometimes in the BOP they get transferred for various reasons. Is that a situation that will not occur with this program?
It's unlikely to occur. And you're correct, with typical federal inmates who happen to be tribal members that are not part of this program, if they've got a longer sentence, they may be transferred at various points throughout that sentence. But I really don't anticipate them being transferred, especially because the designation center who is processing these applications is aware, they're seeing the relatively short duration of the sentence. And unless something serious changes, like there's a serious change in medical status that requires an immediate transfer to a medical center, I don't expect that persons who are in this program are going to be transferred. And there may be 1 or 2 exceptions that will happen over the years, but I don't expect it happening with any regularity that you should expect.
Thanks. Another question, has BOP notified Congress that the 100-person capacity limit has been reached?
Yes, we have, and we're actively working on a legislative strategy to, raise that issue and to have the cap raised as well. So it is something that we're working on.
Thanks. Next question, just for clarification, did you say that the tribe can apply prior to sentencing, or do you have to wait until the defendant is sentenced?
You're going to have to wait until the defendant is sentenced. I know that can be frustrating. It's a question that we get a lot, and sometimes the questions, it's clear the frustration behind them, that this is something that the tribal court would benefit from greatly if they knew in advance at the time of sentencing that they had this resource available for sure. And that's one thing that BOP cannot guarantee in advance. We will have to receive the application and fully process it, because there could be something unexpected that makes the individual ineligible. Now, if you're a tribe that has referred someone for a certain crime, and you have someone else being referred for the exact same crime, and it looks like, all things being equal, it should be a pretty similar application, you can expect that BOP is going to accept that person. But it really has to do with us looking at the offense and determining whether or not it's comparable to the Major Crimes Act. We have had tribes submit applications for individuals that are clearly not coming in for a comparable crime, and just hoping that BOP will accept them. And of course, we don't, because we have to give those spots to people who do strictly qualify.
Thank you, Tim. Next question. Are sex offense defendants ineligible for this program?
They are eligible, absolutely. No limits on that.
Thank you. Next question. Could you give us a little more information on placing non-Indians in the Tribal Prisoner Program? What are the parameters, requirements for eligibility?
So there are no parameters. I guess the parameters are the exact same parameters that would apply to Indians, to tribal members. We at no point in this application process are we checking if someone is or is not a member of the tribe. Now, we might ask that for biographical purposes, just in the application, but it is not a necessary element of whether or not they qualify. So there are no differences. All we care about is whether or not the tribal court has convicted this person of a crime. That's it. So all of the jurisdictional complexities of the Major Crimes Act, of McGirt, of Castro Huerta, BOP is not looking at any of that. If the court imposed its jurisdiction on this person and sentenced them to a crime, that's all BOP needs to know about for purposes of whether or not they qualify.
Thanks, Tim. Before I get to the next question, I just wanted to read what Virginia Davis put into the chat. For non-Indian STCJ defendants, the transport costs should be something that you could cover with an OVW jurisdiction grant or through the OVW Special Tribal Criminal Jurisdiction Reimbursement Fund program. For Indian offenders, it may be possible to build the transport costs into other DOJ grant programs. So I just want to make sure I read that. This question, the next one is, will BOP seek an increase in the 100-bed cap at any time in the near future?
Yes, we're definitely working on it right now. And all I can say is that it will move as fast as Congress is able to move. And BOP will be doing the best that it can. And we are currently working to raise that cap. We just reached it, and we're thrilled to see the interest. We want to continue meeting the demand that's there. And as much as you might see in the news that BOP is sometimes hurting for resources, just like most government agencies, we could always do better with more. But an increase of 100 people isn't going to make or break BOP. Our population fluctuates by thousands by the week, so it's not going to kill us to take 100 or 200 extra people. And I am personally advocating to have that cap raised as high as it can go, because the demand is there, and we're providing a service that the community is obviously relying on.
Thank you. Next question. What is the process for individuals to qualify for programming? For example, drug treatment programming. And can you talk about this in the context of people who are sentenced for 1 to 3 year sentences?
Sure. So because substance abuse is, so ubiquitous within incarcerated populations, substance abuse treatment of some kind is offered at every BOP location, period. Whether it's a pretrial facility, a medical center, this is something we offer everywhere. And there are more intensive programs that are available at certain locations. For example, the residential drug abuse program. That is the program I mentioned that by statute, if you complete it, you can get a year off. If you're a federal inmate, it wouldn't apply to tribal program participants. Unless the tribal court called us up and said they wanted to cut the sentence in half or something like that. But that one involves an application process by the candidate once they come into custody. So if the sentencing court recommends to BOP that the offender be placed at an RDAP location, BOP will endeavor to do that. But once they come in, they then have to express their own independent desire to participate in it, because it is a competitive program that sometimes has a waiting list. And I forget the time involved. I believe it takes 2 years to complete it. So you're going to have to obviously have at least that much time on your sentence. So we probably have a dozen substance abuse treatment programs. And then on top of that, another dozen where substance abuse is an element of the program. But some of them are longer than others. Some of them require application of the candidate once they come in. But every BOP location will have some kind of substance abuse treatment program. And then, of course, you can work one-on-one with a treatment specialist as well.
Thanks, Tim. Next question. What is the average length of sentence?
So for the BOP in general, it's 5 to 10 years. For this program, it is about 2 years, because we're looking at sentences that are usually around 1.5 to 3.5 years as the typical sentencing range for what we get. We have gotten folks that have had stacked offenses that go into the 5+ year range, but we're looking at 2 to 3 years typically.
Thank you. Next question. Can you tell us more about the 100 prisoners that you currently have? Where are they coming from? What types of offenses are most common? How many non-Indians, men versus women, etc.?
So 92 out of 100 of them are from Oklahoma tribes. And then we have the remainder are mostly from the Pacific Northwest. And I think we have a couple scattered elsewhere, but that's really what we're looking at. So Oklahoma tribes are really getting good use out of this program. Out of the 100, 2 or 3 are female, but we do have some female offenders in custody. And it might even be a bit higher than that, but it's no more than 5, but we do have some in custody for sure. And the offenses, I would have to look into that. But again, they are offenses that would be covered under the Major Crimes Act. So we definitely have quite a few sex offenses. We have quite a few of those. We have burglaries where violence was involved. But let me not just give you anecdotal examples. I would have to look at that and get a better idea, but it's across the board.
Thanks, Tim. I'm just going to read a question and then an answer from Virginia. Someone asked if the STCJ funding is still available. They heard it was cut by the administration, and Virginia responded it has not been cut, but the application period has been delayed. The grant notice of funding opportunities are expected to come out very soon. So I don't see any other questions right now. If anybody wants to type something in, or if you want to unmute yourself, please feel free to do so. Was there any more of your presentation, Tim, that we missed?
No, I don't know if you're gonna, I'd be happy to share the, you know what? It's just my contact information that I really want people to have, as well as the BOP website. So I'm just going to copy and paste that into the chat if it hasn't been pasted already. That is my email address, and that is the website with the application form and the criteria. But I don't have any other major information to share. Those were excellent questions. You know, everyone covered the scope of what I was planning to talk about. I do see another question here about the racial proportion. I don't know the racial breakdown of the BOP, just like all kinds of demographic data, is available on the website. Everything from the age of the offenders to country of origin, all of those sorts of things. For this program, I don't happen to know, but I don't think that we have any non-Indians in custody actually that are part of this program. I might be wrong about that, but like I said, BOP would not be wouldn't have a problem with incarcerating a non-Indian if they were referred to us through this program. See another. Could you talk about detainer issues? Diane, if you could just specify what you mean a little bit more about detainer issues, if I don't answer your question. But if a detainer is lodged with the BOP, what that means is that we will be very cognizant of whether or not we're not gonna just blindly release that person back into the community until we've made contact with the other jurisdiction for which the detainer has been lodged. And pending charges and detainers also help us understand the security level of the individual. So, you know, if someone has a light criminal history, but they've got charges pending for murder, we're going to think very carefully about that in terms of how we classify them. You know, so the detainer information is not just to help us ensure the continuity of custody and that the person is not inadvertently released to the community if they have a pending charge, but it also helps us with our internal classification. I'm not sure, you know, that might be a non-federal term that I don't know. Notices and release impacts. Diane, if you could just get onto the audio for the chat and tell me a bit, if you could describe a scenario or tell me a little bit more about what you mean, I'd be happy to try to answer you.
Okay, I figured it out. Thank you, Tim. I was just wondering about maybe we have someone who is on a tribal sentence in the program, but also would be looking at maybe this state detainer lodge for maybe other types of crimes, but then release of the individual back into the community, if not directly into state custody. I'm thinking more about victim notice. It's all
got it.
and you're right. It's about level of release and safety.
Mm-hmm.
Also making sure that we don't lose anybody because maybe the state case they decided to withdraw the detainer. but something gets lost, or timing issues become a problem.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation. So victim notification is actually a dedicated part of the application. So that's something that we're going to ask about separate from detainers. We're going to ask about the need for victim notification for the identity of any victims that wish to be notified upon them going back into the community. So that is something that BOP would handle. We're not going to, well, we would certainly not ask the tribe to withdraw any independent notification process that they have, but we will also use our own notification protocol based on whatever information is given to us in the application under the victim notification section. And in terms of someone going to another jurisdiction, you know, you alluded to it, sometimes charges are dropped, detainers can be lodged, and when that other jurisdiction finds out that the individual is in custody already, that they've been prosecuted for another crime, especially if they hear anything about federal, they might say, oh, that's good enough. You know, we don't need to waste our taxpayer dollars on this. You know, we've gotten our pound of flesh vicariously through the BOP. Whatever they may be thinking, sometimes a jurisdiction will withdraw those pending charges. And that's something that BOP is going to check. So we're going to have to get something from them in writing to say those, you know, the detainer is withdrawn, or the charges have been dropped. We no longer need this individual, et cetera, et cetera.
Thanks. It looks like we received a question via email. Why do we fill out forms for release 2 years in advance?
If I understand the question, actually, I'm not sure that I understand the question. Forms related to release, such as victim notification, or where they're going to be released back into the community, things like that. You know what, I would benefit from a little bit more context on that question. If the person who emailed it in could hop on the chat and by audio perhaps, and elaborate a bit more, I would appreciate it. But we do have to know where they're releasing to. We do have to know about potential victims that we need to notify as the release term comes to an end. The reason that we need to know about release is that sometimes BOP will be the entity that facilitates the release. You know, will help the person get back to where they have to go sometimes. I do see someone just jumped in here. Please go ahead.
This is Jerry Waits from Cherokee Nation. I was the one that asked the question.
And could you tell me a little bit more about what you mean about what, you know, what information BOP is asking about that
Sure.
Yeah.
I have received an email. The person isn't to be released until 2027, and they sent me some forms to fill out of how we're going to get the person home. Have we purchased a bus ticket? Are we sending tribal police to pick them up? And I have had people that have been moved. I actually got one that was just moved to California. So I don't know why I have to fill those forms out if they are going to move them, because it says on there that you're supposed to turn it into the case manager 120 days in advance, but they're asking 2 years in advance for these forms. I
have no idea why you're getting that so early. You're completely within your rights to just say, you know, the determination has not been made at this time how that's going to work, and that you'll return them. You know, could you please reach out to us closer to the release term, because that is really, really far in advance. I don't know why you'd be getting that question so far out.
Can I send you the email that I received so you can see it?
You can. I try to keep myself uninvolved with those kinds of communications. I'd be happy to look at it, but
Okay.
you know, if there is something that happens where after you do express the desire to only do this closer to the actual release date, if there's some kind of issue, you know, you can definitely reach out to me. I don't mind looking into it. But if any of the case managers are asking any of the tribes about how someone's going to be getting back home, and it's that far out before the end of the sentence, that's I mean, unless you happen to know the answer for sure that far out, it's more than okay to tell them that that determination hasn't been made yet, and you know, that you'd appreciate if they could reach back out at a later date.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I see two more questions. One, on the TB test requirement, is there a time limitation on the results? We recently received TB tests from a local jail facility, but the test results were from August of 2024. Do the test results need to be more current?
I don't actually know the answer to that question. You know what? I would have to look into that. Kevin, you and I email on a regular basis. Let me look into that, and I'll email you directly with the answer. But that's a good question. I don't know the limit on the time frame on when BOP needs those tests to be taken. I'll look into that.
Thanks. One more question. Does having a tribal jail make application for BOP incarceration less eligible or lower on the list?
It's irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. Like, we have zero, it has no impact whatsoever on the application. It's not something you should worry about.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. I guess if anyone has questions, they can email you or reach out to us if for some reason they misplace your email or something. We'll get them connected to you. But we really appreciate your time, Tim. It's been very helpful, and we look forward to maybe having you at ITWIG meetings at some point in the future when things work out that way. But we appreciate this. And, you know, if there's more issues, I suppose that tribes have in the future, maybe we could set up another webinar too at some point.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. And this is going to be a learning experience going forward. We are going to have, you know, hiccups, issues, things arise from time to time. But I really have to say that this has been a remarkably successful program. Whatever has, you know, little again, I can only call them hiccups or things that we've learned from. They've been minor, they've been routine, and we're really glad that we have the enthusiastic cooperation of all of the client tribes that have worked with us to help make this go as smoothly as it has. And for those who have returned from BOP custody, which is now, it's maybe been 6 months now that we've had people rolling with rolling releases. We can start to learn from those individuals what their experiences were like, what feedback they have for their tribes that they'd like to pass on to BOP. But I just want to say on behalf of BOP, thank you all. Thank you, Chia, for organizing the event. And I look forward to reconnecting with you at another time.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We just dropped a little evaluation in the chat. If you could fill it out, it's very, very short. I promise, less than 1 minute, a couple clicks would help us out. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day.